Well, I think I've got 6:01 or something like that. Let me start and welcome everybody. And if you're watching online or joining us, this is the second session of a study of the books of Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel. And let me just briefly recap where we were last week. Story starts with a woman named Hannah, who was one of two wives to a man named Elkanah, who the Bible describes as childless and unable to have a child. And she prays to the Lord, if he would only give her a son, she will give the son back to the Lord. She does conceive. She gives birth to a little boy named Samuel, which means asked of God. And when he's weaned, which in those ancient times was probably at least age 2, maybe age 3, gave him to the priest, Eli, to live there at the tabernacle with the priest. And the little boy, Samuel, has a call from God to serve him. And Eli has a couple of sons that are corrupt, that die. And eventually, welcome, I'm just recapping, Samuel becomes the priest and the prophet and the judge, which is highly unusual. He's the only person in the Old Testament to fulfill all those roles. He is the priest there at the tabernacle, taking over for Eli, his sort of adoptive father. He speaks for the Lord, receives messages from the Lord, so he's a prophet. And he is the authority over this loose confederation of tribes. So that's what they called the judges. He is the last of the judges before the monarchy begins. So he is priest, prophet, and judge. And we talked about last time how the Philistines were this people that were the coastal people there on the Mediterranean who began to encroach more and more on Israel, on this loose confederation of tribes that made up the nation of Israel. There were more Israelites in terms of population than there were Philistines, but the Philistines were more advanced in terms of weaponry and warfare and soldiers, and they began to dominate the Israelites. And Israel called upon God to help them, even though the Israelites, were not following the Lord. They were involved in idolatry and disobedience, but they thought they could win the battle against the Philistines if only they took the Ark of the Covenant into battle with them. And we read about that, how they took it into battle with them. And I mentioned that the two sons of Eli died. This is how they died. They died in this battle. They were the ones carrying the Ark of the Covenant, which the Israelites saw more as a magic item than a sign of the power and obedience to God. They seemed to think of it more as a magical totem than a symbol of the presence or the power of the obedience to God. And so they thought it would win them the battle. It did not. The Philistines won the battle and captured the ark. And then we kind of ended with chapter 5. This is where I'm kind of just recapping. In chapter 5, the Philistines have captured the Ark of the Covenant, this golden oblong cabinet box that contained the tablets with the commandments of God, the 10 Commandments, as well as some other holy items. The lid with the two angels. They had captured that and put it in the temple of their god, Dagon. And as we read last time, and this is a common thing for if you captured the enemy's treasures, especially their religious items, you would put them in your temple as sort of a trophy, as a symbol of your victory. If you think about it, almost, I was thinking about how, colleges might capture each other's mascots or something like that, and but the thing that I have to kind of remind us of every time is in the ancient world, Israel is really unique in the idea that their God, Yahweh, Jehovah, the Lord, is the only God. They are the people who introduced this idea of one God, of monotheism, that there's just one God. They are unique in their belief that the God that they worship is the God, the only God. And all these other nations that they have conflict with are polytheistic, monotheistic, one God, polytheistic, multiple gods. And this is the way it is in pretty much every nation. It is every nation except for Israel. These other nations not only have multiple gods representing the sun or the moon or the river or things like that, but many of the gods of these other nations are fertility gods that they worship because they wanted good crops and they wanted their animals to reproduce, etc. And so that's why so many of these gods were fertility gods, and the worship of these gods involved cultic prostitution, which to us seems abhorrent and weird. The idea you worship a god with a prostitute, but that's how these other cults operated. And the idea, these other nations, like the Philistines and almost all the other people that the Israelites have conflict with, they believe that gods were almost like little governors or little mayors. This God was the God of this area and had some more dominion and authority there, but this God over here was the God of this tribe, and they had authority over there, and these were regional gods. And that, in a way, if you left the territory of that God, now you're under the control of some other God that was the God of that particular land. If you think about even stories like Jonah, Jonah receives a call to go to Nineveh and preach against them. He receives this call from God. So what does he do? He runs away, as in, I've got to get away from God. I've got to get away from Israel, and if I leave the territory of Israel, then God can't find me. Then God can't see me. And that sounds to us, silly, but it is the way the ancient mind thought, that if I travel to this land, there's a different God that rules here than the God of this territory. And that's the way that these ancient minds worked. That you entered the territory and, there's a new God over that land. So this is the way the Philistines thought too. They have now captured the God of Israel, or the idol. In their mind, this Ark of the Covenant would be similar to an idol in many ways. This is where the power of this God resides, and now we're going to put it in our temple, where our God is in charge. And as we read last week, even though the Israelites could not use the ark as a magic weapon, when the Philistines decide to capture it, for them to control God does not bear good fruit for them, and we see how their God, their idol, is knocked over and broken, and they go, we got to move this to a different town. And they move it to a different town, and calamity falls upon that town where they've housed the Ark of the Covenant. And they move it again, and calamity falls again. And so let's kind of pick up where we left off. Let's go to chapter 5, where they have moved it. There are 5 principal cities of the Philistines. And this Ark of the Covenant goes to 3 of them. And all 3 cities where the ark is placed start to feel the effects, the negative effects of having this ark in their presence. So now they're going to move it. I'm going to go back to chapter 8, halfway through 8. Have the ark of the God of Israel moved to Gath, hometown of Goliath. So they moved the ark of the God of Israel. Verse 9, 5:9. After they moved it, the Lord's hand was against that city, throwing it into a great panic. he afflicted the people of the city, both young and old, with an outbreak of tumors. So they sent the ark of God to Ekron, another one of the cities of the Philistines. The ark of the God was entering Ekron. People of Ekron cried out, "They brought the ark of the God of Israel around to us to kill us." This reputation has preceded it. So they called together all the rulers of the Philistines and said, "Send the ark of the God of Israel away. Let it go back to its own place, or it'll kill us and our people. For death has filled the city with panic. God's hand was heavy upon it. Those who didn't die were afflicted with tumors, and the outcry of the city went up to heaven." So they got to get rid of this thing, but they have to be delicate about it. They have to decide, well, how are we going to get rid of this ark without making their God, the God of the Israelites, even more angry at us? So now we're going to start back with chapter 6. This is where we stopped last time. 6. When the ark of the Lord, and again, a reminder, I do this kind of every time. Whenever you see the word Lord in the Bible, in all caps, like it is in my Bible, the ark of the, and suddenly the word Lord is spelled with all caps, that in Hebrew, that is Yahweh. That is the name of God, Yahweh. We used to pronounce it Jehovah, but modern scholars now think the way to pronounce the word is Yahweh. So, which is why it makes more sense sometimes when I'm reading through and I see the word Lord in all caps, I'll actually say Yahweh, because, in some places it makes more sense. Like when Moses says, Yahweh says, "Let my people go," and Pharaoh says, "Who's Yahweh?" In other words, I don't know who that is. When we say the Lord, it sounds like sort of a universal name that everybody would just somehow recognize. But foreign rulers and foreign people, they knew the Israelites' God's name was Yahweh, which is in Hebrew means I am. I am. It's a derivative of the verb to be. So, when Moses asks God in the burning bush, "What's your name?" He says, "I am that I am." And that's why his name is Yahweh. It is the one who is, the one who exists, the one who is. I am Yahweh. So, every time you see Lord in all caps, it's the actual name of God, not the title of God, but the name of God. When the ark of Yahweh had been in Philistine territory 7 months, the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners and said, "What shall we do with the ark of Yahweh? Tell us how we should send it back to its place." They answered, "If you return the ark of the God of Israel, don't send it away empty, but by all means send a guilt offering to him. Then you'll be healed and you'll know why his hand has not been lifted from you." And the Philistines asked their priests, their holy men, "What guilt offering should we send with it?" They replied, 5 gold tumors and 5 gold rats, according to the number of the Philistine rulers, because the same plague has struck both you and your rulers. And you're like, wait a minute, what? We want gold tumors and gold rats? And you're like, huh? Why? Well, first, we say, well, it kept saying the hand of God was killing people in these 5 Philistine cities. How? Well, scholars, based on a lot of this, especially tumors and rats, are assuming it was the bubonic plague, which is carried, how? With rats. And it causes tumors. So, how, what plague is striking the Philistines? Probably bubonic plague. So, again, think of the way ancient people thought. How do we get rid of the tumors and the rats? We make idols of the tumors and the rats and send them out of our country. Okay? We make models. We make a golden rat, or 5 of them, for each of the 5 major cities and the 5 sort of mayors or governors of the Philistines. Make 5 golden tumors, 5 golden rats, put them on the same cart as the ark, and get it out of our territory, because in their sort of magical, superstitious way of thinking, if we do that, the idols of the rats and the tumors, as we take those out of our territory, it will take the actual rats and the actual tumors out of our territory. Okay? Think voodoo doll, think however you want to think about that. So, you'd think, well, what's a nice gift? How about a nice model of a tumor? How about a nice golden rat? It's not meant to be something beautiful or something, oh, what a nice little gift here. No, it is a kind, and we would call it, like say, voodoo almost. It's a way of trying to symbolically rid them of the rats and the tumors. So they replied, 5 gold tumors and 5 gold rats, according to the number of the Philistine rulers, because the same plague had struck both you and the rulers. Make models of the tumors and of the rats that are destroying the country, and pay honor to Israel's God. Perhaps he'll lift his hand from you and your gods and your land. This is their, you think, okay, it has an odd kind of logic to it, but okay. Verse 6, why do you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and the Pharaoh did? This is still the Philistine priest talking. When he treated them harshly, did they not send the Israelites out so that they could go on their way? In other words, when all those plagues hit Egypt, remember they finally told the Israelites, get out. We've had enough. So we got to get this plague out. Now then, get a new cart ready with 2 cows that have calved and have never been yoked. Hitch the cows to the cart, take their calves away and pin them up. Why do they do that? Well, so they'd be more willing to leave if they're not there with their little calves. Take the ark of the Lord, the ark of Yahweh, and put it on the cart. Put it in a chest beside it. Put the gold objects you're sending back as a guilt offering. Send it on its way, but keep watching it. If it goes up to its own territory towards Beth Shemesh, then Yahweh has brought this great disaster on us. If it doesn't, in other words, if it just wanders off some other direction, then we'll know it was not his hand that struck us. It happened to us by chance. So if the cows on their own take it back to Israel, we will know, yes, Yahweh brought the plague on us. If the cows wander the cart off somewhere else, we'll know, well, the plague was just a coincidence. So that's, again, that's their logic. But sure enough, they did that. Verse 10, they took 2 such cows, hitched them to the cart, pinned up their calves, placed the ark of the Lord on the cart, along with the chest containing the gold rats and the models of the tumors. The cows went straight up towards Beth Shemesh. In other words, they headed straight for home, well, not their home, but Israel, for the home of the ark. Keeping on the road and lowing all the way, they didn't turn to the right or the left. The rulers of the Philistines followed them as far as the border of Beth Shemesh to make sure they know, well, where did it go? Yep, went over to Israel. So now, when the people of Beth Shemesh, this is Israelites, when the people of Beth Shemesh were harvesting their wheat in the valley, when they looked up and saw the ark, they rejoiced at the sight. The cart came to the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh, and there it stopped, besides a large rock. The people chopped up the wood of the cart, the wooden cart that it's on. They take the ark and the chest off the cart. They chop up the cart and use it as firewood, and then sacrifice the cows as a burnt offering to Yahweh. The Levites took down the ark of the Lord. Remember why? Because according to all the laws back in Leviticus, only Levites are supposed to handle the ark. Nobody else is supposed to touch it or move it or carry it. Only Levites, only priests from the tribe of Levi or other Levites. Every priest is a Levite, but not every Levite is a priest. Other Levites did other functions, holy functions, who weren't necessarily priests, because only descendants of Aaron are priests. The Levites took down the ark of the Lord together with the chest containing the gold objects, placed them on a large rock. On that day, the people of Bethshemesh offered burnt offerings and made sacrifices to Yahweh. The 5 rulers of the Philistines saw all this, and they returned that same day to Ekron. They're watching from afar to see what happens. These are the gold tumors the Philistines sent as a guilt offering to the Lord, 1 each for Ashdod, Gaza, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron. Of course, of those names, one of them has been in the news a lot lately, Gaza. And the number of the gold rats was according to the number of Philistine towns belonging to the 5 rulers, the fortified towns with their country villages. The large rock on which they set the ark of the Lord is a witness to this day in the field of Joshua of Bethshemesh. But God struck down some of the men of Bethshemesh, putting 70 of them to death because they looked into the ark of the Lord. What did they do wrong? They were not Levites. No one else is supposed to touch the ark. Especially looked into it, opened up the lid and looked into it. Again, we all know from Indiana Jones that's not a good idea. The people mourned because of the heavy blow the Lord had dealt them. And the men of Bethshemesh asked, who can stand in the presence of Yahweh, this holy God? To whom will the ark go up from there? And stories like this where people, mess with the ark and they die because of it seem also pretty harsh and strange to us, but this is everybody knew not to do this, I guess you might say. They sent messengers to the people of Kiriath Jearim, saying, the Philistines have returned the ark of the Lord. Come down and take it to your place. So the men of Kiriath Jearim came and took the ark of the Lord, and they took it to Abinadab's house on a hill, and consecrated Eleazar, his son, to guard the ark of the Lord. So, okay, that's the saga of the ark's capture and return. Now, here we go, kind of the next chapter, if you will, even though chapter 7, starting at verse 2. It was a long time, 20 years in all, that the ark remained at Kiriath Jearim. And all the people of Israel mourned and sought after Yahweh. And Samuel said to the whole house of Israel, if you're returning to the Lord, to Yahweh, with all your hearts, then rid yourselves of the foreign gods and the Ashtaroths. These were these idols. These were these fertility idols, often that were Asherah poles, things like that. Asherah poles were these large poles that, again, symbolized fertility. Commit yourself to the Lord and serve him only, and he'll deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. So the Israelites put away their Baals and their Ashtoreths and served Yahweh only. This is, constant in the Old Testament. The people of Israel turning to the Baals, turning to the pagan worship, turning to the fertility cults. And as I've said many times, it's not like, moving from the Lutheran church to the Presbyterian church. It's not like, well, they're just the same. No, these other cults were involved cultic prostitution as the way you worshiped. So they were very different. The way you worshiped those gods was very different from the way you worshiped the God of Israel. Samuel said, assemble all Israel at Mizpah, and I'll intercede with the Lord for you. When they assembled at Mizpah, they drew water and poured it out before the Lord. On that day they fasted, and there they confessed, we have sinned against the Lord. And Samuel was the leader of Israel at Mizpah. And actually some transcripts actually say the judge. They use this term judge. He is the last judge, just like Samson and Gideon, etc. When the Philistines heard that the Israel had assembled at Mizpah, the rulers of the Philistines came out to attack them. And when the Israelites heard of it, they were afraid because of the Philistines. And they said to Samuel, "Don't stop crying out to the Lord our God for us, that he may rescue us from the hand of the Philistines." And Samuel took a suckling lamb and offered it up as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. Remember, he is judge and he is priest. He cried out to the Lord on Israel's behalf, and the Lord answered him. While Samuel was sacrificing the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to engage Israel in battle. But that day, the Lord thundered with loud thunder against the Philistines and threw them into such a panic that they were routed before the Israelites. The men of Israel rushed out of Mizpah, pursued the Philistines, slaughtering them all the way to a point beyond Beth-kar. So the Israelites have thrown away their idols, turned away from idolatry, at least for now, pledged themselves to follow Yahweh, and this time it's not because they carry the ark into battle, it's because they've pledged their allegiance to God that now they do indeed win the battle. Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shin and called it Ebenezer, which, remember, an Ebenezer is a rock of remembrance, a pile of rocks, a monument to God's victory or faithfulness, saying, "Thus far the Lord has helped us." So the Philistines were subdued and didn't invade Israelite territory again, at least for a while. Throughout Samuel's lifetime, the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines. The towns from Ekron to Gath that the Philistines had captured from Israel were restored to her. So these towns that had been Philistine towns, well, they'd been Israelite towns, then they were Philistine towns, now they're Israelite towns again. And Israelite delivered the neighboring territory from the power of the Philistines. And there was peace between Israel and the Amorites, another neighbor. Samuel continued as judge over Israel all the days of his life. So, Samuel grew from this little boy, this little toddler, who was brought to the temple to be the greatest judge, really, since Joshua of Israel. From year to year, he went on a circuit from Bethel to Gilgal to Mizpah, judging Israel in all those places. Here, settling disputes, making judgment, doing more what we think of when we hear the word judge. He always went back to Ramah, where his home was, and there he also judged Israel, and he built an altar there to the Lord. So Samuel, again, is a great leader. He's a prophet. He speaks for the Lord. He sacrifices for the people. He gives them direction. He settles disputes. He is a great leader. When Samuel grew old, though, here's something sadly that is all too familiar. Chapter 8. When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as judges for Israel. In other words, this sounds familiar, right? Because Eli appointed his sons as priests, and they were rotten, right? They were robbing the people. They were sleeping with the women who worked at the tabernacle. They were cheating everybody, and they were cast aside. When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as judges for Israel. The name of his firstborn was Joel. The name of his second was Abijah, and they served at Beersheba. His sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. And again, this is a pattern we're going to see, sadly, all through the Bible when we get to the monarchy. You'll have a good king, followed by 2 or 3 bad kings. And then you'll have, again, we got a good king finally. And you have a nasty bad king again. And this happens over and over and over again. And even though Samuel was a great leader, he does not able to produce good sons. And we're in chapter 8, by the way. Chapter 8, so his sons are not fit to succeed him. And, again, throughout history, that happens not just in monarchies, but it happens in lots of places where, whether it's a company or a church or all kinds of places where the idea of, well, the son will succeed the father, and the son doesn't have the same gifts or the same talent, doesn't always happen. Occasionally it does, but often it doesn't. So his sons are not fit to be rulers. So chapter 8, verse 4. So all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, "You're old, and your sons don't walk in your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." And it's that last phrase that's going to be important in all of this. We want a king so we can be like the other nations. We want a king like the other nations have. It's on the face of it, well, it makes some sense. I mean, given the what we've known about how Israel is constituted, it's these tribes that have a very loose sort of confederation. They're not very united. They're all sort of on their own. They have their own tribal leaders, and they only work together when they absolutely have to, when they're about to be invaded, or then they'll, God would raise up a judge, a leader of someone like a Gideon or a Samson, and who would lead them for a period of time, and then they'd go back to being their own sort of autonomous little territories. That made them weak. And you think, well, a centralized government would make a lot of sense in terms of national defense and some other things. So what is wrong with them saying, we want a king like the other nations? What's wrong with that idea? They're not supposed to be like the other nations. They're supposed to be different. They're supposed to be different. And their king is supposed to be God. They're supposed to not be a monarchy. They are supposed to be a theocracy. They are supposed to be a country where God is the ruler. God is the king, and they look to him for direction. And to say we want to be like all these other nations is to say, these other nations are pagan and have corrupt worship and evil practices, and to say, well, we want to be like everybody else is not what God would want to hear. It's not, and it kind of goes back even to, the kid who says, everybody else is doing it, I want to do it. And the mom and dad say, well, just because everybody else does it doesn't mean you'll have to, if everybody jumped off a cliff, would you jump off a cliff? If everybody else is doing something that they shouldn't do, and a child says, well, I want to go do that too, it's mom and dad's job to say, well, no, just because everybody else is doing it doesn't mean you're going to do it. And they're saying we want to be like the other nations, which is really now, we're going to see, taken as an insult to God. Verse 8:6, chapter 8, verse 6. When they said, give us a king to lead us, this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord. And the Lord told him, listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king, as they have done from the day I brought them out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you. Now listen to him, but warn them solemnly, and let them know what the king who will reign over them will do. So that's why God says to Samuel, it's not you. You've been a good leader. You've listened to me. You've given the people my word. You have been my prophet. You have done a good job of leadership. It's not you they're rejecting, it's me. They want to be like these other nations instead of having someone listen to me and lead them. So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, and here's his okay, you want a king? Here's what's going to happen. Because you want a king, here's what you're going to get, okay? This is what a king, this is 8:11. This is what the king who will reign over you will do. He'll take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they'll run in front of his chariots. In other words, he'll draft your sons into his army. He'll conscript them into his. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest. Still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He'll take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. It's not just your sons he'll take your daughters too. He'll take the best of your fields and your vineyards and your olive groves and give them to his attendants. He'll take 1/10 of your grain and your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants. In other words, taxes, taxes, taxes. He's going to tax you and take the best of what you got. Your men servants and maid servants and the best of your cattle and donkeys he will take for his own use. He will say, I'm the king, so I'm going to take what's the best of everything. He will take 1/10 of your flocks. In other words, that's about tax. That's a tax rate. And you yourselves will become his slaves. So this is what you're asking for. When you're asking for a king, this is what it's going to be like. This is what it means to have a king, a human king. When that day comes, you'll cry out for relief from the king that you've chosen, and the Lord will not answer you in that day. So he lays it out. Is this really what you want? 19, but the people refused to listen to Samuel. No, they said, we want a king over us. Then we'll be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and go out before us and fight our battles. So that's how they're looking at it. If we have a king, we'll have somebody to fight our battles for us. And Samuel's like, well, how do you think he's going to fight those battles? He's going to draft your sons, and he's going to take your fields, and he's going to take 1/10 of all your crops and 1/10 of all your animals and tax you. He's just laying it out for him. And Samuel heard all the people, and he repeated before the Lord, and the Lord answered, listen to them and give them a king. So Samuel said to the men of Israel, everybody go back to your town. Okay, now we're about to enter the period of the monarchy. So, there was a Benjamite. In other words, he's from the tribe of Benjamin. The tribe of Benjamin is the smallest of the 12 tribes. If you remember, if you remember all the way back to Jacob, has 12 sons. That's where the 12 tribes come from. Jacob marries 2 women, Rachel and Leah. He loves Rachel. Do you remember that? He is fleeing from his twin brother, Esau, who he's cheated out of his inheritance, and he's cheated out of the birthright. And Esau, his twin brother, says, I will kill you. As soon as our father dies, I'm going to kill you. And so remember, Jacob flees to his uncle's house, his mother's brother, his uncle Laban, and he falls in love with his cousin Rachel. And his uncle says, well, if you work for me for 7 years, you can marry my daughter Rachel. And Jacob's like, he's so in love with Rachel, he's like, okay. And he works for 7 years so he can marry Rachel. And they have the wedding, and remember, women, lots of veils, lots of everything. They have the wedding, go into his tent, consummates the marriage. Morning, sun comes up, looks under the veil. There's the sister Leah. His uncle has switched the women, and he's married the ugly sister. It doesn't use the word ugly. It says she had weak eyes, which is a euphemism for she was not attractive. So Laban pulls the switcheroo, and instead of giving him Rachel, the love of his life, he has him marry his older girl, Leah. And when Jacob goes to his uncle and says, why in the world did you do this? He says, well, she's the older sister. Of course you had to marry her first. He says, you can have Rachel too if you work for me for 7 more years. So he works for his uncle 7 more years, and he finally gets Rachel, and they are both having babies. Leah has 6 sons. Rachel doesn't have any. And she prays, and there's this, of course, many women in the Bible, it seems like they have a hard time. In his old age, after Leah has given him 6 sons, and then they've said, well, Rachel says, I can't have any children, so you're going to have to sleep with my maid, and any of her kids will be considered mine. And she gets her maid, and Jacob sleeps with her maid, and Leah says, 2 can play that game, and she says, you got to sleep with my maid too. So Jacob is sleeping with both sisters and their maids, and that's where the 12 boys come from. 6 of the boys are Leah's. Another, 6 plus, another 4, 2 from each of the maids. That makes 10. Finally, Rachel has a son, Joseph, and then she has one other youngest boy, Benjamin. Guess which 2 boys are his favorites? Joseph and Benjamin, of course, because they're the sons of his favorite wife. That's why Joseph, when they have the 12 tribes, Joseph gets a double portion. Ephraim and Manasseh are the name of Joseph's 2 sons, and they each have it. So his 2 sons each get their own tribe. They get a double portion. And then Benjamin also is a tribe, but it's the smallest tribe. So, and remember, Levi doesn't get land. Levi gets the priestly income. So anyway, all that to say, Benjamin is the smallest of the 12 tribes, but is one of the 2 sons of the favorite wife. So, and that whole story reads a lot like, a soap opera, as we know. So Benjamin, he's a Benjamite. There was a Benjamite, a man of standing, chapter 9, Benjamite, a man of standing, whose name was Kish, son of Abiel, son of Zeror, son of Bechorath, son of Apharhai of Benjamin. And he had a son named Saul, an impressive young man, without equal among the Israelites, a head taller than any of the others. Saul is a big, tall, good-looking young man. Like the tallest man in Israel. He's a big, tall, strong, good-looking man. Now, his path to being the king is kind of weird. Now the donkeys, what? Wait a minute, donkeys? The donkeys belonging to Saul's father Kish were lost. And Kish said to his son Saul, take one of the servants with you and go and look for the donkeys. So they got to go find the lost donkeys. So he passed through the hill country of Ephraim, through the area around Shalisha. They didn't find him. They went on to the district of Saalim. Donkeys weren't there. They passed through the territory of Benjamin. They didn't find him. They reached the district of Zuph. And Saul said to his servant who was with him, come, let's go back, or my father will stop thinking about donkeys and start worrying about us. But the servant replied, look, in this town, there's a man of God. He's highly respected, and everything he says comes true. Let's go there. Perhaps he'll tell us the way to take. In other words, there's this holy man who lives here, and, he knows stuff. Maybe he can tell us where the donkeys are. He's what they used to call a seer. He can see things. So let's go find the holy man and say, can you help us find these donkeys, these lost donkeys? Saul said to his servants, if we go, what can we give the man? In other words, we're going to have to pay him. These guys don't work for free. Saul doesn't really understand how any of this works. Well, if he's a seer, and we ask him for a favor. We're going to have to give him something. He says, and the food in our sacks is gone. We have no gift to take to the man of God. What do we have? The servant said, well, I have a quarter of a shekel of silver, which is about 3 grams of silver. It's not much. I'll give it to the man of God if he'll tell us what way to take. And then parenthetical comment, at least in my Bible, this is in parentheses. Formerly in Israel, if a man went to inquire of God, he would say, come, let's go to the seer. Because the prophet of today used to be called a seer. Okay, that's a little editorial comment there. Good, Saul said to his servant, come, let's go. So they set out for the town where the man of God was. They don't even know his name. This is how out of, they don't know. They're not into any of this politics or anything else. They don't know this. There's a man of God. There's this man of God that lives here. As they're going up the hill to the town, they met some girls coming up to draw water. And they asked them, is the seer here? He is, they answered. He's ahead of you. Hurry now. He's just come to our town today. For the people have a sacrifice at the high place. Remember, Samuel was traveling from town to town, settling disputes, all that. As soon as you enter the town, you'll find him before he goes up to the high place to eat. The people won't begin eating until he comes, because he must bless the sacrifice. Afterwards, those who are invited will eat. Go up now, you'll find him about this time. So that the man of God, the seer, he's actually coming to our town. We're going to have a sacrifice. He's going to preside over the sacrifice. He should be there any time. You can find him. They went up to town, and as they were entering, there was Samuel coming towards them on the way up to the high place. The high place is where they're going to offer the sacrifice in this particular town. This is before the only way you could offer a sacrifice was to do it in the temple in Jerusalem. That's much later. There's sacrifices offered all over different towns, all over different places. So, now, the day before Saul came, the Lord had revealed this to Samuel. About this time tomorrow, I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin. Anoint him leader over my people Israel. He will deliver my people from the hand of the Philistines. I have looked upon my people, and their cry has reached me. So he's like, you're going to meet a Benjamite. He's the one. He's the one that's going to be the new king. So you're going to meet this guy tomorrow, and he's the one. So be on the lookout for this Benjamite. Saul approached Samuel in the gateway. Verse 17. When Samuel caught sight of Saul, the Lord said to him, that's the man I spoke to you about. He will govern my people. Like, he's the one. So Saul approached Samuel in the gateway and asked, would you please tell us where the seer's house is? We're looking for the seer. We want to see the seer. I'm the seer, Samuel replied. Go up ahead of me to the high place. Today you're going to eat with me. And in the morning I'm going to let you go and tell you all that's in your heart. As for the donkeys you lost 3 days ago, don't worry about them. They have been found. Like, how do you know that? How do you know about the donkeys? And to whom is all the desire of Israel turned, if not to you and all your father's family? In other words, he really is a seer. Like, I know what you're looking for. You're looking for donkeys. They've been found, but you're going to stay here and eat with me. And tomorrow I'm going to tell you some pretty important stuff. And because he says, to whom is all the desire of Israel turned, if not to you and all your father's family? Like, that's a mysterious thing to say. The desire of the nation is looking to you? Saul answered, am I not a Benjamite from the smallest tribe of Israel? Is not my clan the least of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin? Why do you say such a thing to me? Like, what are you talking about? Samuel brought Saul and his servant into the hall, seated them at the head of those who were invited, about 30 in number. And Samuel said to the cook, bring the piece of meat I gave you, the one I told you to lay aside. The cook took up the leg with what was on it and set it in front of Saul. Samuel said, "Here is what has been kept for you. Eat, because it's set aside for you for this occasion. From the time I said, I have invited guests." And Saul dined with Samuel. After they came down from the high place to the town, Samuel talked with Saul on the roof of his house. They rose about daybreak, and Samuel called to Saul on the roof, "Get ready, and I'm going to send you on your way." When Saul got ready, he and Samuel went outside together. As they were going down to the edge of town, Samuel said to Saul, "Tell the servant to go on ahead of us." And the servant did so. "You stay here a while, that I may give you a message from God." Then Samuel took a flask of oil and poured it on Saul's head and kissed him, saying, "Has not the Lord anointed you leader over his inheritance?" In other words, he now anoints Saul as king. When you poured oil on the head, that was called anointing, and that was the way, instead of like putting a crown on somebody's head, that was the way you said, "I'm now making this person king. I am now," because, I mean, you think about this, this is like in medieval times when the Pope is putting the crown on the king's head, okay? This is like the Pope saying, "Okay, I now crown you King of France," or whatever. This is what is happening here. Samuel is pouring oil on his head, saying, "You are now the leader." It says, "When you leave me today, you will meet two men near Rachel's tomb." Remember Rachel I mentioned before. Rachel, the love of Jacob's life, died, and this is where Jacob buried her, and her tomb became a well-known place. Near Rachel's tomb at Zelah on the border of Benjamin. They will say to you, "The donkeys you set out to look for have been found, and now your father stopped thinking about the men, is worried about you. He's asking, 'What shall I do about my son?'" He's telling him, you're going to meet two men, and this is what they're going to say to you. This is always for Saul to know, this guy really does see. He is a seer. He's like, this is what you're going to meet. This is what they're going to say. This is what the conversation will be. Then, he says, you will go on from there until you reach the great tree of Tabor. 3 men going up to God at Bethel will meet you there. One will be carrying 3 young goats, another 3 loaves of bread, another a skin of wine. They'll greet you and offer you 2 loaves of bread, and you'll accept them. These are all the things, these are the signs that will show you that I know what I'm talking about, that I really am a seer, that I really am a messenger from God. I'm going to tell you everything, all the people you're going to see and what you're going to encounter and what they're going to say and how it's going to go down, so you will understand and realize I'm for real, that this is all real. After that, you will go to Gibeah of God, where there's a Philistine outpost. As you approach the town, you will meet a procession of prophets coming down from the high place with lyres, tambourines, flutes, and harps being played before them, and they will be prophesying. The Spirit of the Lord will come upon you in power, and you will prophesy with them, and you will be changed into a different person. Once these signs are fulfilled, these are all signs, do whatever your hand finds to do, God is with you. And you say, you'll start prophesying. Well, what's happening here? What's really going to happen? Well, the word there that can be interpreted prophesying doesn't only mean like speaking, thus saith the Lord. In this context with lyres and harps and flutes, it probably means they are all, what we would call speaking in tongues. They are all, or what's sometimes called ecstatic speech. They are probably shouting, yelling out, maybe in another tongue. They're dancing, they're singing, they're playing music. It is an expression of religious fervor, okay, when they start dancing and singing and playing the musical instruments. And he says, and God's Spirit will come upon you, and you're going to start doing it too. And so it says, go down ahead of me to Gilgal. I'll surely come down to you and sacrifice burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. You must wait 7 days until I come to you and tell you what you are to do. So he said, this is all the things that are going to happen. These are all the signs that you're going to have. As Saul returned to leave Samuel, God changed Saul's heart. And all these signs were fulfilled that day. When they arrived at Gibeah, a procession of prophets met him. And the Spirit of God came upon him in power, and he joined in their prophesying, which I think is this probably akin to speaking in tongues, ecstatic speech, dancing, singing, etc. When all those who had formerly known him saw him prophesying with the prophets, they asked each other, "What is this thing that's happened to the son of Kish? Is Saul also among the prophets?" Like, this is way out of character for Saul to be doing any of this. A man who lived there answered, "Who's their father?" And it became a saying, "Is Saul also among the prophets?" This became kind of a little phrase. Like, really? Is Saul one of them? Is Saul? I've never seen Saul get that religious before. After Saul stopped prophesying, he went to the high place. Now Saul's uncle asked him and his servant, "Where have you been?" "Looking for donkeys," he said. "When we saw they were not to be found, we went to Samuel." Saul's uncle said, "Well, tell me what Samuel said to you." Saul replied, he assured us that the donkeys had been found, but he didn't tell his uncle what Samuel had said about being king." So he didn't tell him any of the really important thing. He said, yeah, he told us the donkeys were found. Samuel summoned the people of Israel to the Lord at Mizpah and said to them, "This is what Yahweh, the God of Israel, says. I brought Israel up out of Egypt. I delivered you from the power of Egypt and all the kingdoms that oppressed you. But you have now rejected your God, who saves you out of all your calamities and distresses. And you've said, 'No, set a king over us.' So now present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and clans." So all the different tribes represented there, and the clans within the tribes. And it says, Samuel brought all the tribes of Israel near, and the tribe of Benjamin was chosen. Well, what do you mean chosen? What's implied here is that they somehow drew lots. The akin to drawing straws or throwing dice. Like, okay, which of the 12 tribes is the king going to come from? Well, let's all draw straws. Benjamin! Okay? Which tribe is chosen? Because this is how the Lord, in front of all the people now, how is the Lord going to say who the king is going to be? So they would call it casting lots, which would be kind of like I say throwing dice or some other way of randomly among 12 tribes saying which is the tribe that the king is going to come from. So they cast lots or they draw straws or whatever, and Benjamin is chosen. Then he brought forward from the tribe of Benjamin, clan by clan, and Matri's clan was chosen. Finally, Saul, son of Kish, was chosen. What do you know about that? From thousands and thousands of men, they narrow it down to this tribe and this clan and this family and this guy, Saul. When they looked for him, he wasn't to be found. Where is he? Where's Saul? They inquired further of the Lord, "Has the man come here yet?" And God said, "Yeah, he's hidden himself among the baggage." Like he's over there by the bags. Which is, again, an odd thing. Modesty, reticence, or hesitancy to actually assume the throne. They ran and brought him out, and he stood among the people. He was a head taller than any of the others. Like, oh man, obviously he's going to be the king because he's tall. I mean, what else do we need to know? He's the tallest man in the kingdom, so he's got to be the king. Samuel said to the people, "Do you see the man God has chosen? There's no one like him among the people." And the people shouted, "Long live the king." Which is an interesting way to choose a leader. Which of the 50 states shall the president come from? Well, Georgia. What town in Georgia? Plains. It's how they chose the leader. But you see, God had already chosen him. But this is a way for the people to see in a very public way that this is the man God has chosen. A very public way that the man God has chosen to be king is Saul. Verse 25, Samuel explained to the people the regulations of the kingship. He wrote down on a scroll and deposited it before the Lord. Then Samuel dismissed the people, each to his own home. This is interesting because the king's power is not absolute. This is like a constitution. This is like a Bill of Rights. This is like a document that basically says, here is a scroll with the regulations between the people and the king. This is a document. This is not unbridled power. This is a constitutional monarchy. This has some limit to it. Matter of fact, I have a note here that says, though Samuel reluctantly designated Saul as the first king, he insisted on safeguards, much as the United States government rests on a document, the Constitution. So Saul's kingship was defined and limited by certain rules, which Samuel wrote down and placed in the tabernacle as a permanent record. Now, what we're going to see, and you'll see this coming up, I won't have time, we won't get there tonight, but what you'll see is Saul is now the king, but Samuel is still the one who speaks for God. And it's like, who trumps whom? Where's the true power? There is a sense that Saul is king, and he's going to lead the people. He's going to lead them into battle. He's going to organize the armies. He's going to organize the government. He's going to collect the taxes. He's going to do all that. But when it comes to who gives direction from God, Samuel is still saying he's the one who says this is what God is saying. And he really, the only modern example I can think of, which is not a great example because, of course, it's not a good place, but would be Iran. If you know anything about how Iran runs, Iran has a parliament, Iran has a president, Iran has a prime minister, etc., etc., etc. But who controls Iran? The Ayatollah. Yeah. Whose name is Khomeini, different from the one from the late 70s, but this one is also named Khomeini. The Ayatollah, the Khomeini, the religious leader, has veto power over everything. It doesn't matter what the parliament decides or the president decides or anybody else decides. The Ayatollah in Iran can veto anything and everything. He actually is the ruler. Because the Ayatollah in Islam, in the Shiite form of Islam that is in Iran, they understand he is the one who speaks for God. So the other government officials are still under his control. Now, I say that's a bad example because Islam, I believe, is not the true religion, and I believe even those countries where Islam is practiced in a more moderate or a way that is a little more reasonable. Iran is a enemy and a terrorist and organization and state sponsor of terrorism and all kinds of corruption there. I'm just using an example to say, here you have a nation where they have a government, but above the government there's a religious leader who really calls the shots. That's the way it's set up now. With Samuel is still saying to Saul, he's still giving Saul orders. He's still telling Saul what he can and can't do. So it's like, where's the real power here? Well, we're going to see some of that play out, and that's going to be the cause of some conflict. So let's look at chapter 11. We got time at least for chapter 11. It says, Nahash the Ammonite went up and besieged Jabesh Gilead. Okay, now finally the map I gave you, okay? this one. Did everybody get one of those? There's some on the end of the pews. Did you get one? You can see these places, okay? You see there where it says upper third of the map, towards the middle, there's a kind of a red star, and it says Jabesh Gilead. You see that? And then you see Ammon over there in the lower right, where it says Ammon, as in the Ammonites. Okay? So if you see where the tribes of Israel are, you see there's the Jordan River, okay? The right down the middle of the page is the Jordan River. And the Jordan River divides, the Israel from the area on the east of the Jordan is sometimes called Gilead, and that the green is still part of Israel, but to the farther east, that yellow, that is Ammon, which is where the Ammonites were. Okay, and so you're going to see this story that's in this chapter. Chapter 11 is where this whole story takes place. So you can refer back to this map as we're looking at this story of chapter 11. So Nahash the Ammonite, he's from Ammon, went up and besieged Jabesh Gilead, which is in Israelite territory. They're in Gilead. And all the men of Jabesh said to him, well, make a treaty with us and we'll be subject to you. In other words, okay, you win, we'll serve you, we'll pay you taxes, or you've got us. But Nahash the Ammonite replied, I'll make a treaty with you only on the condition that I gouge out the right eye of every one of you and so bring disgrace on all Israel. So he doesn't want to just conquer them or, get their stuff or collect taxes from them. He wants to humiliate them. He wants to make all the men, at least, probably not good fighters with one eye. He says, okay, unless you let me gouge out all your eyes, I'm going to keep warring on you. The elders of Jabesh said to him, give us 7 days so we can send messengers throughout Israel. If no one comes to rescue us, we'll surrender to you. In other words, we have no choice. I guess it's one eye or it's death. And we're pretty isolated here. And if no one else comes to help us, because Israel, remember, is this loose confederation of all these tribes and villages. Is anybody going to come to their rescue? This was always the problem with Israel throughout the period of the Judges. It's not a unified nation. It's a bunch of city-states and territories. When the messengers came to Gibeah of Saul and reported those terms to the people, they all wept aloud. Just then Saul was returning from his fields behind his oxen, and he asked, what's wrong with the people? Why are they weeping? And they repeated to him what the men of Jabesh had said. Remember, just because he's king doesn't mean he's not out plowing his field. When Saul heard their words, the Spirit of God came upon him in power. He burned with anger. He took a pair of oxen, cut them into pieces, sent the pieces by messengers throughout Israel, proclaiming, this is what will be done to the oxen of anyone who doesn't follow Saul and Samuel. The terror of the Lord fell on the people. They turned out as one man. In other words, I'm calling everybody to come and fight. From all the tribes, if you don't come, I'm going to cut up all your oxen. In other words, you all better assemble and we better form a unified front against these Ammonites. The terror of the Lord fell on the people. They turned out as one man, and Saul mustered them at Bezek. Look on your map there. You see Bezek is there sort of to the left, kind of in the northwest quadrant of the map. Okay, you see Bezek. The men of Israel numbered 300,000, and the men of Judah 30,000. They told the messengers who'd come, "Say to the men of Jabesh Gilead, by the time the sun is hot tomorrow, you will be delivered." When the messengers went and reported this to the men of Jabesh, they were elated. They said to the Ammonites, "Okay, tomorrow we'll surrender to you, and you can do to us whatever seems good to you." Like, of course, they don't say, "We got help coming." They went, "Well, okay, we give up. Tomorrow we'll surrender." And the next day, Saul separated his men into 3 divisions. And during the last watch of the night, they broke into the camp of the Ammonites and slaughtered them until the heat of the day. Those who survived were scattered so that no 2 of them were left together. So Saul musters all the men of the different tribes. They surprise attack the Ammonites, slaughter them, save the town of Jabesh Gilead from them. And verse 12, the people said to Samuel, I skip over one thing. I skipped over something at the end of, go back to chapter 10 for a second. I skipped over an important verse. Chapter 10, verse 26. It says, Saul went to his home, after he's chosen by Lot to be the king. Saul went to his home, accompanied by valiant men whose hearts God had touched, but some troublemakers said, "How can this fellow save us?" They despised him and brought him no gifts, but Saul kept silent. This is after Saul was chosen by Lot to be the king. That said, some troublemakers went, "Who's this guy?" You know, they dissed him. They said, "Yeah, how can this fellow do anything?" So just keep that in mind. I should have pointed that out. I skipped over that. So Saul delivers the town. He defeats the Ammonites. And so the people said to Samuel, "Who was it that asked, 'Shall Saul reign over us?' Bring these men to us and we'll put them to death." In other words, these are the troublemakers. They're like, now that Saul is a hero, Saul has conquered the Ammonites, Saul has brought us together. Remember those guys who scoffed and said, "Who is this guy? Bring him out and let's kill him." The scoffers, the troublemakers. But Saul said, "No one shall be put to death today. This day the Lord has rescued Israel." So Saul shows compassion. He's the bigger man. He's not going to take revenge on these troublemakers. He's going to show himself to be beneficent and etc., which makes him even more elevated in the eyes of the people. Samuel said to the people, "Come, let us go to Gilgal and there reaffirm the kingship." So all the people went to Gilgal and confirmed Saul as king in the presence of the Lord. There they sacrificed fellowship offerings before the Lord, and Saul and all the Israelites held a great celebration. So when did Saul become king? Because in 3 different times, there's 3 different places where he becomes king. In secret, it's just him and Samuel. Samuel pours oil on his head and says, "You're the king." The only 2 people who know it are Samuel and Saul. So at that moment, God says, "He's the one I've chosen. He's the king." At that moment, he has been anointed as king, but it's a secret. Then there's the drawing of the lots. And goes from tribe down to Benjamin and this clan and this family, and Saul son of Kish, he's the winner, chicken dinner, whatever. And now the people are, "Here's your king. He's this really tall guy." And the people are like, "Long live the king." And somebody was like, "Yeah, I don't know." There's some guys who are like, "I don't know about this guy." You know, some scoffers, some troublemakers. But now he's officially been, Samuel says, "Here's your king." But now he gathers the troops. He goes and defeats the Ammonites. And he's, the brilliant general who's defeated the enemy. And it says there, they reaffirmed his kingship. So when does he really become the king? Like, Well, it's kind of a three-stage process, isn't it? It's like he's the king in secret. He's the king by lottery. But now he's shown himself to have the qualities that they want in a leader as the king. And now he is affirmed as the king. And you think, oh, what a great story. And if only it ended right there, we go, what a great king. But it doesn't end there. It doesn't end there at all. Saul, this is probably Saul's high spot here. This is probably, if Saul's trajectory is, this is here, okay? And everything from here on out, it's going to go the other direction. Sadly, it's all going to go the other way from here. Because, is he a bad guy? He's not a bad guy. He just becomes paranoid and jealous and suspicious and, all that whole power corrupts and all that. He becomes insanely suspicious for no reason and jealous. And we all know the person he's going to be jealous of is David. And that's going to be his downfall. So anyway, I'm going to end there on a high spot for Saul before we next week look at the beginning of his slide down. So let's pray. Lord, we're thankful for these stories that show us that life in this time was 3,000 years ago was so different, and yet awfully similar in so many ways too. Just like the people of Israel, sometimes our hearts are drift away from you, and help us to not let that happen. Help us to stay close to you. Help us to stay close to you every day. And we pray that you bless us and our families and friends this day. Amen. All right.